Hello today. Yesterday I was kind of very gentle person and I told you how it's easy to work with integrations and everything is out of the box. But today we are far from shallow and things are getting complicated. And I will tell you about relationships in eazyBI and how to change them and how to forge new relationships. So first I will remind you what is context. Probably you already know it. Today you practiced it. Then I will give you 3 use cases and recipe how to change the context. Even it's a complex thing, the principle how to do it is quite easy. So, what is context? At least in our documentation we write that it is pages, rows, and columns, everything you have selected in the report, they form the context. But the important thing is the measure. The measure is the treasure and it is context responsive. And it is the binding point to get the report context. I believe you practiced it and kind of understand that if you are looking on some number in the chart, it is impact and formed by the selections on pages, rows, and columns. So you intuitively already do it. So then it's important to keep it in mind when you build new relations or calculations. Dimensions themselves in eazyBI don't have direct connection. They are independent. They doesn't mean anything if there is no measure. Measure is in the middle of all relations. It has relation to each dimension, and only through the dimension we can see how, for example, time is related to the label or to the version. If I'm changing the metric I choose for report, also you will see different numbers and different relations between time and the label. I would say that eazyBI, I'm using usually star scheme for people who are not fluent with multiple data cubes, and it helps to understand this concept of measure being in the middle, that each point of the star is a dimension and the core is measure. And eazyBI has full of such small stars, so it's your job, if you want to build something new, to combine them wisely. When you might need to change the context if you have already a lot of different ways how dimensions are related. There might be, at least I counted 3 use cases. One is when there are 2 different objects and they look the same. For example, it could be a team field in one app, in Jira app, and another team field in another Jira app. They have the same values because they are maintained by different people, but actually it would make sense to measure them together. Or if they have some shortage, you can create custom fields that replicate the sprint name or fixed version, even if you don't get access to the real one. Another use case is that there could be the same object, but it is represented in different dimensions. Users. In Jira, there are the same set of users, but they could be reporters, assignees, or users who are logging hours. And then the same person is represented differently. And it would make sense sometimes to see how it goes for the person if we put all the metrics against only one dimension or name. Similar case is with issues. Issues could be in issue dimension and also in linked issue dimension or epic link. So the one object in 2 dimensions. And the third option is that if you have data from several data sources and you would like to combine them in some new relation or forge some bond between them. So I will give you 3 use cases with formulas and the star schemes, so to illustrate what is missing and how we are filling it, so you could use this concept, how to think about changing context later on yourselves. The first use case is hours spent by users. So in eazyBI, we have metric hours spent, and it could be analyzed from different viewpoints. We will go to the user dimension where the same person is represented in different roles. And if we analyze hours spent by assignee, we would get one result. It would show how many hours are spent on issues that are assigned currently on this person. If we look on the same metric by logged by dimension, we would see how many hours are logged by this particular person. So he worked or she worked on this so many hours. If we combine those two, we get a different result. We would see how many hours are logged on the issues that are assigned to the person itself. So those are three different metrics. And we can get those, so if you build a simple report, we put assignee dimension, logged by dimension, and pick hours spent, we can get all those data here. But for me, it's hard to read. I can see that the same person appears several times in the report, and it doesn't make sense, and I don't know when I have to calculate, sum up something, or what to do with this information. It would make more sense to see all those three metrics side by side, and the person mentioned only once. So how to do it to get all those three different results, but using only one of those dimensions? It means that we can change the context how the further calculations are relating to the assignee dimension. To do this, we will write a tuple. Ilse today told you how to do it, showed you how to do it. So here again, we use a tuple, and it's very good for changing the context in the simplified use cases. The most important thing in this tuple is that we take the metric, the core element, to bind the data together. Without the metric, tuple is not, in my eyes, not real tuple. Then in the line 4 and 5, I'm doing a trick. I'm using function getMemberByKey. I kind of saying that I want assignee dimension, what we have on report rows, represent the logged by dimension members. Those two lines say, look up for the person in logged by dimension that matches the assignee on report rows. And the 7th line, what it does is, okay, no, and then if we find this person in logged by dimension, we can ignore the currently selected assignee. Its job is done. In other words, we are replacing assignee with logged by. And this is how we calculated the last column to see how many hours are spent on any issue by the users that is mentioned on report rows. It allows us to compare different data. So when we looked at the first functions, so it's on the first calculation, it's probably the right time to go through the key functions that you are going to use to change the context. One is this getMemberByKey. For some people, it helps to think of it like a lookup in an Excel, but I would say it's functions that looks for something similar by name, not by nature. The second one is default member. It's used quite widely in the tuples to ignore some of the dimensions you already have on report rows. It's for breaking the current context and the current relation between measure and dimension. And then there's function default context, which is exaggerated version of default member. It says, okay, let's ignore everything we have on the report except the things we have listed within the function. So it's very focused. It really helps when you list if you know only things you want to keep, not just what you want to ignore, but if you know things you want to keep, the relations you want to keep with the metric. So yeah, those three are commonly used to change the context, and we will use them in our further examples. Group issues by linked bug priority. So the use case I believe is quite common. The idea is if we use issue dimensions, issues, together with priority dimension, it would group issues by priority. This is our default context, and this is how the priority are related to issues through measure issues created and other like issues resolved or story points. In eazyBI, there's option to import linked bugs or linked issues, a separate dimension. And usually it will be, if we add it to the report, we can see which bugs are linked to which issues. But if we start to add this priority dimension, it would give the same result for all the linked defects because it is related to the issue. And such kind of information doesn't make, for me at least, it's not important to see split by priorities. It would make more sense to see the priorities of the bugs themselves, not the issue. I would prefer a report like this to see the list of defects related to the particular issue and group them by priority. This would give more insight in our data. So to do this, I will go with schematics with stars. By default, what we have on the left side is this star scheme. In the middle, there's issues created, what I had in the report, and there is priority and link through it. What we want something different. We want that there's priority of the bug in our report to group the data. But the problem is we don't have such a dimension in eazyBI. Nevertheless, we don't have such measure. So my solution would be to create calculated measure and make the priority to imitate the priority of the bug instead of priority of the issue. And yes, I can do it with calculated measure. Now comes in the recipe, how to change some behavior of one dimension to behave differently as you want and to be related to some other object. The formula maybe will be longer, but the concept is those 3 steps. First, you have to iterate through the object you are interested to and for which you want to build this new relation. In my case, I will go through bugs. Then you have to create this new relation. And the third, you have to ignore or ignore the current default relation that you have already in eazyBI. Let's look on the calculation, how it looks in the real life. There is an aggregate of sum. Today, Ilse already showed you a similar formula for count, and and there was also for average. So the first is to iterate through bugs. We use function filter and descendant set. It says, let's go through bug dimension members at the bug level and apply a filter criteria for it. The second step is to create the new relation. For creating new relation, we use default context. It will take, again, the existing relation of issues created. We will look on the issue dimension and look for the issues that look like our bugs we are interested in. Get member by key does that. And in the last, we specify that for this relation, we want to take only this issue and priority part, how the bug issues are related to the priority, nothing else. And in the last part, when we are summing up, this is the place where we destroy all the relation and say, okay, now the priority has played its role a bit in the previous step. Now we can kind of say, let's forget what we have in the report for the priority and use the default member. So, if you didn't notice, the idea is to create this relation in the balance and keep in balance the dimension for which you are changing relation. In one part of the formula expression, you are defining it using default context and get member by key. On the other part of the calculation, you are using default member to ignore its current default relation to metrics and report. Yeah. So here, in my example, the priority is in both parts of the formula. To go step back, it's, yeah, in this step and this step should be balanced. So, the last use case, which actually inspired me to find this way how to do it in 3 steps, or just to categorize this change for context, is due to X-ray solutions, because they use issue types heavily, and there's some specifics, and data model is quite complex, and some metrics are related to tests and some to test executions, and sometimes they have to be mixed together. And so in many cases, they were asked to count test runs, which are usually based on parameters assigned to the test executions, but they want to see them by labels assigned to the tests. So I needed to find how to redefine the relation between label and test runs. Again, I used the same formula. You will see how it goes through. I iterate through the tests because I wanted to create new relation from test perspective, create a new relation between test runs and labels of tests, and then ignores the labels of the tests. Again, set of this says that we are going through X-ray tests at the test level and apply filter. For filter, we are looking for the tests that we have in this default context, X-ray tests created, so we are looking for a test who have the specific label and ignore the rest of the options in the report, only the test and label connection. And in the last step, we are taking now our X-ray test runs, already execution-related measure, and say that we are ignoring the label here, because we already have taken label into account in the filter criteria. And again, here's the same balance. In one place, I'm choosing to establish relation between label and test, and in the second, I'm choosing to ignore it and destroy the default context. So here's the report representing the illustration of 3 stars of the test executions and tests. In the right column, there's test runs as they usually are related to labels. On the left column, there's test runs by labels. On the far right, there's tests by labels. And that you can see that in the middle, there are filled data in on the places where are test labels, but they are representing the numbers of the test runs. So what I wanted to just point out regarding changing the context. There are 2 things that you actually have to remember, even not those 3 steps, but 2 things that the context is based on the measure. Measure is the core element for each relation in eazyBI. Dimensions are not related to each other directly. They are related through measure. And the second one, when you build calculation with context change, you have to keep the balance. If you destroy in one part of the calculations relation with default member, then you have to create it in some part else in this calculation. Keep the balance. So, yes, this is my easy 1, 2, 3 step way how to change the relationship in eazyBI. I hope you find it easy too. If you don't, you can come to me and ask. I will try to explain it in other words and again, but in 3 steps. So thank you for hanging on with me on this topic.